welcome to Camp Constitution Radio with your host, Hal Shurtleff. This show is heard on WBCQ The Planet every Monday night at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's also heard on Podomatic, Camp Constitution Radio. Just go to Podomatic and you'll be able to get not every single show, but a lot of the shows we do, and you can download it for free. We also have some classic interviews, Gary Allen, Alan Stang, and speeches and so forth from the 70s and 80s, some timeless, even the 60s, timeless information, especially for those who are pretty new to the freedom movement. There's a lot of great stuff out there, and it's really important to be well-rounded in your understanding of the problem. So this show is brought to you by Camp Constitution, which, among other things, runs a week-long family camp. Next year's camp will be in the Berkshires of Massachusetts, western Massachusetts, in the city of Pittsfield. It's a beautiful camp. It's in a rural setting. It's in a city, but we're on a beautiful lake, and there's plenty of trees and vegetation around there. And the camp will run from August 5th to the 11th, Sunday to Saturday. And we've got quite a lineup of instructors. Now, we have some of our camp regulars, like Reverend Stevie Kraft, and which is nothing regular about it, by the way, Earl Wallace. But we also have coming to camp Professor Willie Soon. He's returning. And we have Christopher Monckton, Lord Christopher Monckton, Dr. Duke Pesta of the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh, who is one of the top experts on Common Core and many other things. In fact, Duke has a show. It's Freedom Project Media, FPE, Freedom Project Education Media, and I was a guest on there a couple of weeks ago, and if everything goes smoothly, I'll be on there today, Monday. Well, actually, I record this program usually a day or two ahead of time, and so that will be in the morning. So you'll be hearing this. You can go to FPE or go to my Camp Constitution's Facebook, and you'll see the video posted there. And the reason why I wanted to bring up today is Sunday, the November 5th. This is the known as Guy Fawkes Day, the bombing and the gunpowder plot, the foiled attempt to overthrow the Protestant regime there in England. But also was a terrible tragedy today, and we're not getting a lot of information. At 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and there was a church in Sutherland, Texas. I guess it's near San Antonio. It was a small Baptist church, small meaning 50 or so people participate or attend on a regular basis. And I heard early this afternoon when I returned from church, that there were about 27 people dead. I expect a few more, that the gunmen fled. And I'm just hearing now that he was killed. And don't say who killed him, if he was killed or committed suicide, or killed by deputies or sheriff or what have you. And we don't know much about it at this point. So by the time this will air, but every time there's a shooting like this, the first thing is, of course, a clarion call for more gun control. In fact, it was interesting. It was last year, one of my pastor and a member of the church approached me about coming to church armed. And I think this is something that churches will have to do. They'll probably have to have more than one person. You have to have a person or two outside of the church and a couple inside at the entranceways and so forth. This is just a sign of the times, and unfortunately, this is what we're going to have to do. There was about a month ago. There was a Somali national. He was a Somali, moved to the United States, and he became bitter towards the Christians, and he went into a church, and it was in Tennessee. You didn't hear much about it. He only managed to kill one person, thankfully, instead of many more. It was a tragedy for the one person who died. He wounded some. But there was an usher who took action and took him out, got him on a commission so he couldn't do any more damage. And, of course, you didn't hear about it in the mainstream media because of being a Muslim. You don't want to put any negative press for Muslims. Well, I'm expected to have Tom Moor, my co-host, call in pretty soon, but to talk about something. You want to talk about the Clinton uranium scandal. It was kind of interesting, too, when Hillary Clinton was Attorney General. She was involved in a uranium deal for a company in Russia that got a big chunk of the uranium, like 20% of our uranium. And then a nice donation was made to the Clinton Foundation. And that story appeared in the New York Times. It didn't appear in the, some obscure, unreliable source of information. It was in the New York Times, which, of course, must be true, and all the news that fits, right? So even in the far-left journals, and I'm saying that tongue-in-cheek, legitimate newspapers like the New York Times, but they even reported that story. It was quite fascinating, too. I think I'm going to be talking about this with Duke Pesta. It was about 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago, there was a man arrested at the Capitol, the U.S. Capitol, for throwing little paper flags or plastic flag, Russian flags, in Trump's direction and shouting, Trump is treason, and things of that nature. It's very interesting when people on the far left start using the term treason. You see, treason is a term that you use, it's in the Constitution, is aiding and abetting our nation's enemies. And there are people who are guilty of treason, there's no question about it. I certainly don't believe Trump is one of them. But when you use the term treason, you are actually advocating nationalism or a sense of a country that you can't.
Hi, Al.
Hey, Tom, I'm just calling in. Well, anyway, Tom, I was talking about the man who was arrested at the Capitol in D.C., and he used the term treason. And treason, when you use that term, you're acknowledging this a sense of nationhood, and then you could be called a nationalist if you believe in that. But I just wanted to mention really quick before we get into our conversation that he was none other than Ryan Clayton. Ryan Clayton was the former executive director of the left-wing organization called Wolfpack, founded by Cenk Uygur, Armenian Holocaust denier, to get an Article 5 convention. And I actually bumped into him on a few occasions in New Hampshire and Massachusetts. I think you were with me, Tom. You probably remember the guy. He threatened to sue me 2 years ago. Was something that I had nothing to do with. So no lawsuit so far. And I just kind of interesting when you wanted to discuss, among other things, the Russian issue, the Russian whether or not Trump was and Putin were collaborating to steal the election. And I think it's important to point out for those people who are kind of new to the movement, or just maybe forgot, or maybe read a book back in '72 and forgot what it said, but there has been the United States, or elements within the United States, have aided and abetted the Soviet Union from the Bolshevik Revolution, which, of course, is the 100th anniversary, up until recently. And one of the best researchers on that subject is Anthony Sutton. And I know your library is, I think, full of Anthony Sutton's books. He was a researcher.
Yes, I have right in front of me, I have Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution. Which is one of his trilogy, which includes Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler and Wall Street and FDR.
Yeah.
So at that time you have all these three factions in the world in that early 20th century appearing outwardly to compete against one another, but then controlled by the very same bankers from within.
It's fascinating, too, how that General Electric, for example, helped bankroll Nazi Germany to some extent. I say bankroll, but to some extent. I.G. Farben, if you read that book, Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler, you did a lot about I.G. Farben and the various chemical companies that in the United States. Bayer Aspirin, by the way, is one of them. And their goal, they basically said to the Germans, look, you can deal with they had a process to turn coal into oil, hydrogenation, I think it's called. And they didn't want to mess with the rest of the world, so United States, and they said, look, you could keep that, we won't mess with that, and, you do this, your thing, and we'll do our thing. And so they worked together to form this cartel, IG Farben. And I believe Nuremberg was the headquarters of the German branch of ITT, and it was in the 1960s, and Ed Griffin pointed this out, that International Telegraph and ITT actually sued the U.S. government for damages and won their case. And, of course, ITT, the building was left intact pretty much. Nuremberg was bombed, but they said, we have to keep this building intact. So I recommend any of those books, and they're available on Amazon, Wall Street, The Rise of Hitler. There's another one that he published in the 80s. It was called The Best Enemy Money Can Buy.
Wow.
And he quoted, this was during the Reagan administration, the man who was Secretary of the Navy, whose name I just can't recall at the top of my head, he was speaking to the graduating class at Annapolis, and he said, gentlemen, in a short time, you will be on your ships, and when you look over the horizon, you'll be looking at some of the best ships that American technology can build. Unfortunately, they will be on Russian ships. And people don't seem to understand. Most people don't know this. I remember I was visiting the Aviation Museum in Connecticut. This would have been about 10 years ago with my daughter, one of my daughters, and I picked up a newsletter from United Technologies, which includes Sikorsky helicopter. And by the way, the founder, Igor Sikorsky, was a white Russian and a U.S. patriot and a Christian. His son, I guess something happened along the way. His son didn't share the same views. And there was a little article the son wrote bragging about how he and his fellow internationalists were in Eastern Europe during the height of the Cold War in the 60s, selling technology to the communists. And when I saw that, I wrote a letter to him. I still have a copy of the letter. And I asked him how many Americans were killed in Vietnam with technology that you sold the communists. For some strange reason, he did return my call. But Tom, you wanted to go into a little more detail about the uranium one scandal.
Well,
issue.
yeah, we started with treason, and it's interesting for the past year that we've had Donald Trump elected. Now, it was a year ago this week. The Democrats maintained that the Russians hijacked our election, and he has some sweet deal with the Russians, and he's actually, some are even saying he's a Russian agent. Now, it's interesting that the Democrats they overplayed their hand. They thought they had that election in the bag. Of course,
right.
The pollsters, they maybe had the pollsters in the bag, and it now seems that some of the pollsters were putting out those polls showing Hillary in the lead, just to turn a lot of Republican voters away and say, well, it's already in the bag. But maybe
keep
that
people
happened
home
the other way around. But it's interesting that before the election, we never heard any accusations, did we, that Trump was in bed with the Russians?
We didn't
Not
hear
at all.
any
That only happened
accusations.
after, and I think the reason that Trump sort of lets that go on and is that there's nothing to it. He's probably saying to himself, well, they're going to attack me on something. They might as well attack me on something that they have no proof and is totally bogus.
Interesting, too, that until he threw his hat in the ring, and probably not until he looked like he was a viable candidate, I think it was a field of 16 Republicans all looking to become the next president. And the field narrowed, he ended up winning New Hampshire in a big margin, and he started winning state after state. Then all of a sudden, Trump is this evil racist that probably held Klan rallies in Midtown Manhattan, and has nothing but a racist background.
Yeah.
Tom, I was watching an old YouTube some boxing matches, and there was Donald Trump in the ring. He was involved with the promotion of I would think it was one of his hotels. He's congratulating the boxer, shaking their hands. Black people all around him. Nobody's calling him a racist. But all of a sudden, he runs for office, and he becomes a viable candidate, and he's some kind of evil, horrible racist. That's all he lives to do is to exploit black people.
But it's funny. It's interesting.
Ludicrous.
The Democrats lost on that account, too. So the Democrats believe that they own the black vote, and to some extent that has been true. But in this past election, what Trump did was he went into those Rust Belt swing states like Pennsylvania and Michigan and Ohio, Wisconsin, and said, look, so are more of you employed or unemployed after 8 years of Obama? What have you got to lose? I'm not going to sell your jobs down the drain with TPP and other bad trade deals. I'm going to fight for your jobs. And just enough of the black vote switched over and voted for Trump. The working blacks said, okay, and they were threatened so many ways. Obama was just telling them, you couldn't be, you were an Uncle Tom if you voted for Trump. But they went ahead and voted for Trump, and they gave him that edge in those crucial states. So that backfired too. They can say what they want to say. They can play their games, but Americans of all colors are waking up to the importance of having a national economy and not this globalist thing.
You know, it's interesting, Tom, if you did a YouTube search for black conservatives supporting Trump, you'll find quite a few. And it's a wide range of people, young blacks, old, middle age, inner city, college graduate types, engineer backgrounds. And there was these two lovely black ladies. They go by Diamond and Silk, I think. And, they're kind of humorous. They do a lot. They're always out there, with videos, and there's just so many people out there, black people out there. I don't think you're going to find too many black people who are big McCain support. They may have, some may have voted for McCain, but to be back in 1912 or Romney, was it 12 or almost? Was it?
Yes,
12?
well, McCain himself is a vicious traitor, selling out America left and right whenever he can. Romney is probably less so. Romney is more the milquetoast country club type, but none of them really said we're going to fight for American jobs and have a national economy again the way Trump did.
That's right. So I think you're right. I think that unfortunately many blacks will vote Democrat because they think they're supposed to. It was interesting. You read people like Walter Williams, and Walter Williams, I read an article. It was an older article, but he said something to the effect that the black family it survived slavery, it survived the Civil War, it survived Reconstruction, it survived Jim Crow, it survived the Ku Klux Klan and the lynching and all that, and it survived not because of government, but in spite of it. In fact, the most of them were Republicans. You wouldn't find too many Democrat blacks, but it was the New Deal, or I call it the New Steel, that started promising stuff. And, there were a lot of black homeowners. There was many black married couples that owned their own home. There was, and today the numbers are just the opposite, where 80 to 85% of young blacks were raised in a two-family household, male and female, husband, a father, mother. That's turned around. And it's because of the welfare policies that the Democrats, and the Republicans too, have promoted, and they somehow think that, this is how we're going to support the black community by giving you stuff, and it's been a total disaster. And I think
that gets back into our original topic of, socialism and, the democratic ties to Soviet Russia. So unlike Trump, Hillary really does have some treasonous ties to Russia, and that is her uranium pay-to-play deal, where the Russians appear to have been given, some very valuable, nuclear fissionable uranium rights in the United States, and that was negotiated by Hillary. And then you just go back through time 100 years ago. So you have then Soviet Russia. Okay, it's a different kind of Russia, but Russia nonetheless, and the ties to, as we said, the Democratic Party, to Wilson,
that's right,
to Mendel House, who was kind of like a British agent and Rothschild's agent. Then you have Jacob Schiff and this whole Federal Reserve crowd giving money. And then you have the Warburg brothers. One came to America from Germany, and that was Paul Warburg, started the Federal Reserve and the Council on Foreign Relations. He was the first chairman of that. His brother Max stayed in Germany at the time and arranged for Lenin's secret train to Russia in this year 100 years ago. So then Lenin comes into Russia, and they have this provisional government in Russia. And then this week, 100 years ago, Kerensky, it wasn't really, Kerensky was just kind of like the setup guy.
That's right.
And he was in on the deal. And here's why. Ralph Epperson said this, that Kerensky freed thousands of Bolshevik revolutionaries, this provisional guy in the middle between the Tsar and Lenin. He was funded by the Federal Reserve crowd. He was the only member of the provisional government who wasn't shot after the coup. And then he was refused burial rights. When he died, he actually came over and worked, I think, for Stanford University, this guy Kerensky. So they set him up with a posh job here in America. But then when he died, they didn't give him burial rights. The Russians, the true Russians, they said this guy was a traitor to Russia.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
They wouldn't give him burial rights, even neither the Russian nor the Serbian Orthodox churches. So they understood his treason, and he was involved with this whole Fed crowd. You had this Red Cross group go into that was there 100 years ago as we speak, and making this transition into Bolshevism. And then before that was done, Stalin killed 20 million Russians. So those are the ties of the Democratic Party, and some ties which apparently remain today in selling the uranium.
It's amazing. You mentioned the Red Cross mission. It wasn't so much the Red Cross as the person in charge of it. His name will come to. Huh?
I say it was a front. Yes.
Yeah, his name will come to me. He was Teddy Roosevelt's campaign manager for the election of 1912. And there was a book called British Agent. It was written by a man who had been a diplomat in Russia during the Bolshevik Revolution. And he witnessed this American that came over here to basically, and he was on the phone. He had been offended by one of the Bolsheviks, and he's on the phone to Lenin. And he's basically telling Lenin what to do. I mean, nobody talked to Lenin that way. And I think it was Trotsky's nephew that was giving him a hard time, and he called to complain. And when he did so, he sent him to burn Switzerland. And he gets off the phone, and he said, well, I want him to burn in hell, but I'll settle for burn Switzerland. And in fact, Ed Griffin mentions this man, and I'm just having a mental block. I can't think of his name in the book, Creature from Jekyll Island. And I was just happened to be going through an old bookstore, an old antique shop, and I saw the book British Agent. I says, "Oh my goodness!" And it was there. It tells the whole story. And the man was also Teddy Roosevelt's campaign manager at the election of 1912, and that was the first one. Oh, this was the third, the Bull Moose Party. Right. And no question that Roosevelt, he still had a lot of support, and as a result of that three-way race, Woodrow Wilson got in because he did get some electoral votes.
I know about Wilson. Actually, the chairman of the Democratic Party was Charles Crane of Westinghouse. So, and that's a very interesting story too. So on the Democratic side, it seems what you're saying, Hal, is maybe they controlled both parties by that time. Because on the Democratic side, there is Charles Crane leaving New York on a ship called the Christina, and who was on the ship but Trotsky and several hundred paid revolutionaries. So it's during World War I, and the Christina stops up in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and the Canadians want to arrest these guys. They say, wait a second, Russia's our ally. We need Russia to fight on the other side of Germany to win this war, as we did in World War II. You take out Russia, it's going to be hard to win this war. And these guys are going to weaken Russia, with their revolution. So we got to arrest them. Well, this Charles Crane stepped up and said, no, you don't, and it'll be a big international incident. He pulled some strings, and he got Trotsky over there to join Lenin. And as I said earlier, Lenin got through with the help of Max Warburg. And Max Warburg eventually moved to the United States, too, and things didn't work out in Germany. And now he has a square. There's a Max Warburg square. We drove by it the other day in Jamaica Plain. So these guys are just rewarded with statues and squares while everybody else, tens of millions of people die in Russia, and not to mention the Americans that died in that awful war.
That's amazing. Yep. And
then after the war was over, of course, that's our other anniversary this week, it was Armistice Day. And it's interesting that the Illuminati, they're fascinated by numerology. I just know a little bit of it, but they like the number 11, that's their number of mastery and control, and the number 9, I forget what. But so they ended the war in a boxcar out in the woods on 11/11 at 11 o'clock in the morning. Oh, you can't make this stuff up, Hal. So there's all of those 11s, and so that's when we celebrate Armistice Day or Veterans Day, and I do. Of course, I support Veterans Day. I support our veterans, but it's an interesting story as to how that came to be.
That's right. That's right.
And after the war, it's funny. I have a peace dollar. After the war was over, people couldn't figure out why the war was fought in the first place. And then you have these silver dollars, and that was, I think, the only U.S. currency where they printed peace. In God we trust and peace. They were so happy, but of course, thank God they didn't go along with Wilson's peace, which was the peace of the League of Nations.
That's right. In fact, there's some historians have said that the Versailles was nothing more than a 20-year truce, and that the major purpose of both World War I and World War II was for the creation of the United Nations, an organization, a world government entity. And that
then,
was,
we posted this on our website, campconstitution.net. I wrote on Constitution Day, I wrote about how Donald Trump went to the UN and asserted U.S. sovereignty and asserted the Constitution. Not once, but 2 or 3 or 4 times at the UN. I could not believe my ears, Hal. I mean, the only thing better, which he should do, is to say, we're out of here.
Right. Well, thankfully, he did. He pulled us out of UNESCO.
Yeah.
Now, that happened. I think Reagan did the same thing, and Reagan was not. Reagan fooled a lot of people. He was really an internationalist, but he passed himself off as an American patriot. But we got back in under, I believe it was young Bush, because he said, if you don't pay the dues, you're out.
Right.
And so he funded them. And UNESCO was just United Nations Education, Scientific, Cultural Organization. It was so virulently anti-American. But the whole entity, but we should get out. We should get out of the UN altogether. But at least this is a step in the right direction, because there's one thing you wouldn't have seen any of the Jeb Bush or definitely Hillary. They definitely would not have pulled out of UNESCO. They just love internationalism. In fact, when you boil things down, Tom, you can say that there's 2 major groups in the United States: globalist internationalists versus limited government types, or and of course the word nationalist has an ugly connotation, but you could say that patriotism, patriots. Those are the 2 groups, major groups, and the internationalists. They always put the interest of other nations first and foremost. Always.
Right.
Immigration policy, foreign aid, treaties, they always get the best of the deal. And it's been happening, Tom, for over 100 years. You can just see all of the trade agreements, all of when a war ends, who pays for it, who does a lot of the dying.
Yeah.
When World War II ended, what happened? Russia got Eastern Europe. That was agreed to at Yalta, and we gave Western Europe billions of dollars and said you better have a European Union, and that was all about. And Vietnam, something war that we could have won in no time. We were a long stalemate. Now we get more wars, and we're in Iraq and Afghanistan and over here and over there. And let's not
forget that the Korea was left as a stalemate too, and look at the hangover from that.
And we're still dealing with the problem. That's right. It was a truce. I think it was General Mark Clark who presided over the truce, and he said something to the effect that this is I have the dubious distinction of being the first American to sign a stalemate, and we're still over there. And North Korea is still a problem. It's never been solved. So
it's interesting. The Chinese general that was involved with attacking over the Yalu, he said, I would not have gone up against Douglas MacArthur, but I had every assurance from Washington that they had MacArthur on a leash, so I could go ahead and attack.
That's right.
I would not have risked my military reputation against Douglas MacArthur, but they had him on a leash, so that's when I went ahead.
Well, Tom, we have a minute left, so let me just mention I'm going to Tuesday. I was invited to be on the show with David Knight on InfoWars Tuesday morning at 11:15, and
don't forget to mention campconstitution.net and our extremely low price. People will not believe how low that is.
I'm going to have the sign. I'm going to have some props behind me. Believe me, I'm going to mention that. The sign will be right behind me with the contact information, and we're getting a website a little updated over the next couple of days, so people can apply for camp if they want. They can go to our camp bookstore, get some of our material. Of course, we have an Amazon account, so a lot of the things we publish, you can go to Amazon and get them. But I'd rather have them go through our website because we don't have to give Amazon 20% commission. So keep us in your prayers, and I'll be out in Michigan later on this month doing some presentations to homeschool groups. So check us out on Facebook and check our website. And Tom, thank you so much for being on, and thank you for listening. And until next week, God bless.
Happy Veterans Day to you, Hal.